All right, time for day 12. So we're going to actually take a little bit of a break from what happened with Curly, and we're going to meet a new character. And it's kind of late in our book. I mean, we're 66 pages into our book, and the book's only 107 pages, so that's 2/3 of the way through our book, and we're going to meet a new character, which is a little bit odd. So it's something we should definitely pay attention to, and that's our lesson for today. Readers know that ordinarily characters are brought into the story during the introduction. When a character is introduced well into the novel, doing so has special significance. Our character that we're going to be introduced to is Crooks. So we have actually heard of Crooks before and even seen him speak. He is the Black Stable Buck, but we're going to get to know him a lot better right now. And we want to pay attention to, again, how the racial language is used in the books. Like so far, again, we do not say racist terms. That's not acceptable. We will not say them. The book was written in the 1930s, and so far the way we've seen it used is not in the offensive way that we often see it used. We see Slim be very kind to Crooks, even though he uses that terminology. We see the men talk about how very good Crooks is at playing horseshoes. They talk about him being at the Christmas party. So they don't talk about him as if he's an equal, but they don't use the term in a way to offensively bring him down, even though it's not acceptable. It's much more an evidence of the time than an evidence of the horrific idea of slavery. But we need to pay attention because it's not always used that way, and we might see it used a little bit differently today when we meet Crooks. Also, because it's the 1930s, people would probably have very significant thoughts on what a black character would be like. They would assume that a black character would not be educated, would not be smart. We've even talked about how George and Lenny are not traditionally educated. We can tell they haven't gone to school. Doesn't mean they're not smart. We would not expect that our black character in the 30s would be well read. And so we want to kind of pay attention to what kind of person is Crooks. How do people treat him? Do they treat him differently from the way they treat others? Do some people treat him differently than other people treat him? And all of that stuff. And the fact that Steinbeck waited until now to show us all of that will be important. So again, we're starting on page 66, and we're just going to go ahead and get going. Crooks the Black Stable Buck had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On one side of the little room there was a square 4-paned window, and on the other a narrow plank door leading into the barn. Crooks's bunk was a long box filled with straw, on which his blankets were flung. On the wall by the window there were pegs on which hung broken harness in process of being mended, strips of new leather, and under the window itself a little bench for leather working tools, curved knives and needles, and balls of linen thread, and a small hand riveter. On pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with the horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its leather covering split. Crooks had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. There were cans of saddle soap and a drippy can of tar with his paintbrush sticking over the edge. And scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions, for, being alone, Crooks could leave his things about, and being a stable buck and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and he had accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. Crooks possessed several pairs of shoes, a pair of rubber boots, a big alarm clock, and a single-barrel shotgun. And he had books, too, a tattered dictionary and a mauled copy of the California Civil Code for 1905. There were battered magazines and a few dirty books on a special shelf over his bunk. A pair of large gold-rimmed spectacles hung from a nail on the wall above his bed. This room was swept and fairly neat, for Crooks was a proud, aloof man. He kept his distance and demanded that other people keep theirs. His body was bent over to the left by his crooked spine, and his eyes lay deep in his head, and because of their depth seemed to glitter with intensity. His lean face was lined with deep black wrinkles, and he had thin, pain-tightened lips, which were lighter than his face. Okay, so far we've learned why his name is Crooks. He has a crooked back. So I think sometimes people probably would have made the assumption that he was called Crooks because he was like a crook, like a criminal. But no, not at all. He has a crooked back, so the men call him Crooks. The things he has in his room: he has a dictionary, a copy of the California Civil Code. That's like a legal book. So, and he has a pair of glasses. So we can tell that he reads and that he's probably somewhat educated. And of the time, for men who worked on a ranch, this would be unusual in general, certainly unusual of a black man at the time. It also says that he is more permanent than other people because of his job. And it says he's alone. He has his own place on the ranch. And we're going to learn a little bit more about why it is that he has his own place. It was Saturday night. Through the open door that led into the barn came the sound of moving horses, of feet stirring, of teeth champing on hay, of the rattle of halter chains. In the stable buck's room, a small electric globe threw a meager yellow light. Crooks sat on his bunk. His shirt was out of his jeans and back. In one hand he held a bottle of liniment, and with the other he rubbed his spine. Now and then he poured a few drops of the liniment into his pink-palmed hand and reached up under his shirt to rub again. He flexed his muscles against his back and shivered. Noiselessly, Lenny appeared in the open doorway and stood there looking in, his big shoulders nearly filling the opening. For a moment Crooks did not see him, but on raising his eyes he stiffened and a scowl came on his face. His hand came out from under his shirt. Lenny smiled helplessly in an attempt to make friends. Crooks said sharply, "You got no right to come in my room. This here's my room. Nobody got any right in here but me." Lenny gulped and his smile grew more fawning. "I ain't doing nothing," he said. "Just come to look at my puppy, and I seen your light," he explained. "Well, I got a right to have a light. You go on and get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room." "Why ain't you wanted?" Lenny asked. "'Cause I'm black. They play cards in there, but I can't play 'cause I'm black. They say I stink. Well, I tell you, all of you stink to me." Lenny flapped his big hands helplessly. "Everybody went into town," he said. "Slim and George and everybody. George says I gotta stay here and not get in no trouble, and I seen your light." "Well, what do you want?" "Nothing. I seen your light. I thought I could just come in and sit." Crooks stared at Lenny, and he reached behind him and took down the spectacles and adjusted them over his pink ears, and stared again. "I don't know what you're doing in the barn anyway," he complained. "You ain't no Skinner. There's no call for a bucker to come into the barn at all. You ain't no Skinner. You ain't got nothing to do with the horses." "The pup," Lenny repeated. "I come to see my pup." "Well, go see your pup then. Don't come in a place where you're not wanted." Lenny lost his smile. He advanced a step into the room, then remembered and back to the door again. "I looked at him a little. Slim says I ain't to pet him very much." Crooks said, "Well, you've been taking him out of the nest all the time. I wonder the old lady don't move him someplace else." "Oh, she don't care. She lets me." Lenny had moved into the room again. Crooks scowled, but Lenny's disarming smile defeated him. "Come on in and sit a while," Crooks said. "As long as you won't get out and leave me alone, you might as well sit down." His tone was a little more friendly. "All the boys gone into town, huh?" "All but Candy. He just sits in the bunkhouse sharpening his pencil and sharpening and figuring." Crooks adjusted his glasses. "Figuring? What's Candy figuring about?" Lenny almost shouted, "About the rabbits!" "You're nuts," said Crooks. "You're crazy as a wedge. What rabbits you talking about?" "The rabbits we're going to get, and I get to tend them, cut grass, and give them water and like that." "Just nuts," said Crooks. "I don't blame the guy you travel with for keeping you out of sight." Lenny said quietly, "It ain't no lie. We're going to do it. Going to get a little place and live on the fat of the land." If you recall, Lenny was not supposed to tell anybody about this, and first opportunity, here he goes telling Crooks about it. A couple of the quotes that I pulled, he kept his distance and demanded that other people kept theirs. So the reason that Crooks has his own room is because he's black, and he's the only black person on the ranch, and they don't want him in their room. So he has his own place. It says he keeps his distance and demands other people keep theirs. There's not much of a choice. We are dealing the time of segregation. He does not get to be with the other men. That would not be considered acceptable. And so he doesn't push that, but then he kind of expects his own privacy in return in his own room, which goes into the third quote. "You go on and get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room." And he says he's not wanted because he's black. And so he at least gets to have his own space away from everybody else. And so, hey, he's got his own room. He doesn't have to share it with everybody. But, I mean, it's because they think he's lesser and they don't want him there. So it's not a good thing. But Lenny didn't seem to even realize that was what was happening. He's like, why don't they want you in there? And again, that's more of like Lenny's childlike nature, showing us that he doesn't understand these dynamics that are in place, and that at the time, again, with segregation, it would be unacceptable for Crooks to be in there. Lenny is unaware of the way that people interact with that. And once Crooks realizes that Lenny doesn't see him that way and doesn't see those differences, he actually says, "Come on in and sit a while." So he lets Lenny come in and sit down, and he gets more friendly with him, and they start talking. And that's when Lenny gives away the fact that they're figuring about rabbits, and Crooks is just writing him off as being crazy right now. But again, Lenny was not supposed to say anything. Bottom of page 69. Crooks settled himself more comfortably on his bunk. "Sit down," he invited. "Sit down on the nail keg." Lenny hunched down on the little barrel. "You think it's a lie," Lenny said, "but it ain't no lie. Every word's the truth, and you can ask George." Crooks put his dark chin into his pink palm. "You travel around with George, don't you?" "Sure, me and him goes every place together." Crooks continued. "Sometimes he talks, and you don't know what the hell he's talking about." Ain't that so? He leaned forward, boring Lenny with his deep eyes. Ain't that so? Yeah, sometimes. Just talks on and you don't know what the hell it's all about. Yeah, sometimes, but not always. Crooks leaned forward over the edge of the bunk. I ain't a southern black man, he said. I was born right here in California. My old man had a chicken ranch about 10 acres. The white kids come to play at our place, and sometimes I went to play with them, and some of them was pretty nice. My old man didn't like that. I never knew till long later why he didn't like that. But I know now. He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. There wasn't another black family for miles around, and now there ain't a black man on this ranch, and there's just one family in Soledad. He laughed. If I say something, why, it's just a black man saying it. Lenny asked, how long you think it'll be before them pups will be old enough to pet? Crooks laughed again. A guy can talk to you and be sure you won't go blabbing. A couple of weeks and them pups will be all right. George knows what he's about. Just talks and you don't understand nothing. He leaned forward excitedly. This is just a black man talking, and a busted black man, so it don't mean nothing, see? You can remember it anyway. I seen it over and over. A guy talking to another guy, and it don't make no difference if he don't hear or understand. The thing is, they're talking. Or they're setting still not talking. Don't make no difference. No difference. His excitement had increased until he pounded his knee with his hand. George can tell you screwy things, and it don't matter. It's just the talking. It's just being with another guy, that's all. He paused. Okay, so, Crooks starts talking a little bit about his childhood, and about how he lived on a farm. His dad had his farm. We don't know why he no longer has it, and there was white kids on the farm, and his dad didn't want him playing with them, and Crooks didn't understand until he got older. And the implication there is that he didn't realize that they were different, unequal, until he was older, and that's how he would be viewed. And he realizes that Lenny doesn't seem that way now because Lenny's still in that childlike state. Like, children are not born being racist. That's something that they're taught by society. So when Crooks was younger, he and the white kids would run around and play. And then again, the society of the time, as they would grow up, would tell them that was not okay and they couldn't do that. But Lenny doesn't know that. So Crooks kind of starts talking to him. And it's kind of a serious thing he's saying. But Lenny's like, when do you think I can take my puppy home? Because that's all Lenny cares about. And that's when Crooks kind of starts laughing. He's like, man, people can say anything to you. Like, George could say whatever he wants to you, and you're not going to repeat it because you don't even know what he's talking about. And he goes, and I'm just a black man talking. And that's not the term he uses, but he's pointing out that other people would think what he's saying isn't important because of who he is. He's saying, so I can say whatever I want. I can get these things off my chest. And again, we see this over and over again in our book, that these men don't have anybody to talk to. And they're lonely. And here is Crooks, who doesn't even get to stay in the bunkhouse with the men. And here comes Lenny, and he can talk to him, and Lenny's not even going to remember what he says. So he's kind of starting to go off on a tangent a little bit. There's this last thing on your sheet that says drawing conclusions, and it says, why has Crooks been introduced so late? How is the way he's treated similar to the way Lenny is treated? And we know that Lenny is treated differently because of his mental disability, and Crooks is treated differently because of his race. So they're both outsiders on this ranch, and we might see them kind of bond over being outsiders in that way. Don't forget that you are supposed to be doing the second half of the chart with a book of your own. If you don't have a book of your own, Unwind is attached there as well, but make sure you're filling that out. And hopefully you took the vocabulary quiz. That should have been yesterday, and turned in your vocabulary activities. Tomorrow is a reading test. Nothing you need to prepare for, but again, something you need to take seriously and really put forth your best effort on, because it will be an assessment grade. Assessments are 70% of your grade, so this could have a large impact on your grade positively or negatively. And we will continue with Of Mice and Men next week.